So I guess the first thing I'm going to try and talk about is RISCOSbits, which is our newest, for the time being, our newest machine and system and way of doing things. And it is pretty much what it says on the tin, I suppose, in that respect. So FAST it stands for Fast Access Storage Technology. So what we've done with FAST is we've managed to make the Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4 work with SATA-based disks. So we've got a SATA hardware adapter on there that plugs into the PCIe slot, and we've written a driver for that so that you can plug in up to 4 SATA drives, be they hard drives, SSDs, or now, we'll talk about it later, but optical drives as well. So there's a capacity not unlike, I suppose, modules and RISCOS machines of old, where you can have 4 drives all doing different things at the same time connected. No, we've tried and sold machines based on 2 hard drives and 1 optical drive. One of the issues that we've got is one of the SATA ports points externally. So realistically, internally, you get 3 drives. You could have 3 hard drives. You could have, not sure why you'd want to do this, 1 hard drive and 2 optical drives. It would feel a bit bizarre, but you could do that. Or we could have 2 internal SSDs and an optical drive. But you've got that option to plug one in externally. However, the problem that we have there at the moment is the one that plugs in externally then becomes the drive full, so takes over from everything else as the boot drive if you've got it set up in that way. We do use ADFS rather than SCSI. It allows us that easier use of those 4 drives to be able to be used, and that just makes more sense for us. It was easier to write a driver for ADFS than it was to write one for SCSI and all the rest of it with that, so we opted for ADFS as people have systems, I guess, intended when they set that up. So that's what FAST is. We call it FAST because it is possibly the fastest RISCOS computer in the world. And I'll let somebody else judge on that. We're getting around 350 megabytes per second in transfer speeds, which compares to about 80 on an RISC 6 and 120 on a titanium. So disk speed wise, it does appear to be the fastest RISCOS computer in the world. Chris Hall's benchmarks also indicate similar, that we're flying way ahead of the others. It does appear to be about half the speed of direct RAM access if you're using RAMFS. And we think that the limitation now that's causing us to not be able to go much faster is actually not the disk itself or ADFS, it's the file call system. So whilst you can write to RAM slightly faster, we don't think we're going to be able to get any faster. One of the things that we did when we were testing it is we used RISC, because that's probably the biggest and bulkiest RISCOS app currently around, and we used it with the little add-on Iris RAM, and then we abandoned that because it made absolutely no difference. There seemed little point in using Iris RAM with it, because it seemed to run just as fast on the hard drive itself. As a result of that, it is likely that NVMe is not likely to be any faster when you talk about because of that limitation that the file flow is giving. And it currently has the fastest RAM and CPU of any machine as well. So so those 3 things combined, the fastest disk access, fastest RAM, and the fastest CPU, we think, and is corroborated, makes it the fastest RISCOS computer in the world to date. And I'm happy for people to prove me wrong, though, on that one. So some other features of FAST that we talk about, because it's based on the Pi, or the compute module for the Pi. 4K screen resolutions work out of the box. We have it a bit of a snag. We think that we can't work out yet with 60 hertz at 4K. That seems to create some issues. So for the time being, until we resolve that, we're recommending people drop down to lower frequencies rather than lower resolutions. And it was a difficult one, because the person who flagged up that was an issue was running at 4K, where I've tried to run at 4K, and everything's just too small for me. It just makes my life really difficult. So I'd never really tested that. As long as people drop down in their frequency, though, it seems to be okay. But one of the advantages of the FAST system is, like in the days of the RISC PC, it's upgradable. It comes as standard. The base model comes as standard with 2 gigabytes of RAM. If you want 4 gigabytes of RAM, just pop out the compute module, pop another one in with 4 gigabytes of RAM instead. If you want 8 gigabytes of RAM, it might not be much use to you at the moment, because it's not visible to us as yet. Again, same option, just pop out the compute module, pop a new one in with extra RAM, and away you go. If you want to use 8 gigabytes of RAM for Linux, though, then that's a potential for you to do that there. It's got built-in hardware acceleration for graphics, comes as standard on Pi systems, and it's got mature and multiple Linux options. So we do have the option to use the standard Raspberry Pi OS, although we've been shipping our machines for a couple of years now with Twister OS, which has some niceties in that you can skin the look of the OS to look like any version of Windows you like. It also does have the ability, using Wine, to run some Windows programs. It also, if you want to mess about with it, has much more stuff installed as standard. So we've kind of used Raspberry Pi OS, we've used Twister OS, and we're dabbling with some other ones that seem to be have some different things. Sorry about the dog. Have some different things involved in there that are different to Raspberry Pi OS or Twister OS. But we're not really sure about the level of support. You know, with Raspberry Pi OS, to some degree, that there's a level of community support there with that is beyond anything we're ever going to be able to supply. And that's really useful in terms of that. So as a standard, if we're going to ship Linux with it, it would be Raspberry Pi OS. The way we're currently trying to use that, we haven't got it to work just yet, is to just supply Linux on a separate SATA drive. And the easy way of doing that at the minute is to just pop out the SD card around the back, pop a new one in. We are working on whether we can do it through our EDOS system, so it runs from an app within RISCOS. But the easy way at the minute is just simply pop out the SD card, put a new one in. It will automatically connect to the to the Linux drive and run from there. And again, run at fairly quick speeds in terms of what you'd expect if you were running from an SD or a SATA drive connected over USB. It's comparable to a SATA drive connected over USB 3. It's way faster than an SD card on its own. Some real world examples then to show you how it works. I will do some demonstration stuff after. I'm just waiting for RISCOSM to copy across. It compiles a ROM in about 3 minutes and 20 seconds to a disk. So the Chris Hall standard test of compiling a Raspberry Pi ROM takes about 3 minutes, 20 seconds on a disk. To do it direct to RAM, it takes about 2 minutes and 46 seconds. So again, you can see that the speed isn't fantastically different on that. We did a video recently for the I think the fireside chat, where we compiled a ROM and did loads of other things at the same time, and it still did it in about 5 and a bit minutes, even though there were loads of other things happening at the same time. And the other thing, Matthew Phillips from who does the RISCOSM application said it processes their map data at around 70% faster than their other system that came in at a similar price. So they were that impressed that they bought one immediately after we'd given them one to test it. They did it and they said, well, we'll just have one of those then. Thank you very much. Some considerations in terms of what it does. Oh, let me just go back. One of the issues we had when we were trying to get the SATA driver to work is at that point, I think some of this has been resolved since to a degree. The Pi 4 ROM expected to see a driver for the USB 3 ports on the Pi 4. It almost needed to see it and wouldn't work without it. So if people were trying to run on different boards with a Raspberry Pi 4 ROM with a compute module, it would either stall, go horribly wrong, or there would be issues around USB. So one of the things that we had to do was unpick that expectation that there would be a USB 3 port somewhere on there. The compute module board that we use doesn't have a USB 3 port. And as we know, RISCOS is incapable at the moment of using anything at USB 3 speeds. It just downgrades the USB 3 ports to USB 2. So we had to do quite a bit of work to unpick that and get it back to a point where it was expecting something, but not necessarily USB 3. And then we had to write the driver to sit on top of that and get the HAL, the hardware abstraction layer, to recognize that and do something with it. The problem that that's created us, or the consideration, I guess, that that's created us in some ways, is you can't use the nightly builds because they don't have either the SATA driver or the lack of expectation that there's going to be some USB 3 stuff in there. So that means that for us, we have to do a custom ROM build. Now, I guess it's no different to what other people do in that you buy your kit from them, they do you a support scheme with a ROM built in. We've kind of said we'll do 4 of those a year as a minimum, but if we need to do more because things have come online that we think and people are telling us are valuable and useful, and we'd like that now-ish, I'll say now-ish, not now, then we'll do that as we need to. Currently, given that we started selling these at the Southwest show in February, we're on our 3rd iteration of the ROM, where because we've added some basic features and some enhanced features as we've gone along. There is a bit of an issue at the minute still. You'll note probably the availability of the Raspberry Pi 4 itself is currently improving dramatically. I noticed this morning that Pi Moroni and the Pi Hut both had availability of 8GB, 4GB and 2GB versions. The compute module 4 though is still fairly rare. We've got some stock obviously, but to just buy one from a shop at the minute is nigh on impossible unless you're going to pay massively over the odds and wait for it to arrive from China and then realise they've sold you something completely different, but they'll give you 25% as a discount even though it doesn't do anything you wanted it to, as seems to be the way in my experience with things from China when it doesn't quite go as you expect. Some other considerations would be it's easily compatible with other boards. That compute module 4 option just pops in and out, makes it really easy. You can, if you really want, I'm not sure why you'd want to do this, break RISCOS completely and pop in a Banana Pi compute module. RISCOS won't run on that. You can pop in one of the ROC 3 compute modules. RISCOS won't run on that.
it takes it away from what we're doing, but there are those options there for people who really want to do that. It'll be a lot of faff though. It's cheaper than all the other SATA-based RISCOS systems at the minute. The ones that are pure SATA, maybe not cheaper than the ones where, well, I guess as we do ourselves, where SATA is connected over USB, which becomes USB 2, which becomes actually on occasion slower than the SD card. For pure SATA, where our base system comes in cheaper than those other systems that are available. Because the compute module has 2 HDMI ports, as work develops for those, should it develop for those, I guess is a different way of putting that, then we can be there at the forefront as opposed to some of the other machines which don't have that option, or that option is limited by the resolution that they use as standard. We could do, if somebody did the work, I guess, 2 4K screens at the same time. It would run particularly warm, but it is doable, whereas other pure SATA machines don't have that option to that degree. We have the obvious easy Linux options that some of those other machines don't have. The Titanium, I think, flicks quite easily into Linux, but it runs it from an SD card, and unless you're Linuxy enough to work out how to get it to boot from the SD card and then run everything else from a hard drive, it can be quite tricky. For us, pop out an SD card, make sure you've got a Linux disk installed, pop in a Raspberry Pi OS SD card, and away you go with particularly fast Raspberry Pi stuff. And it does have that option of going up to 8 GB of RAM, which is useful if you're going to do that Linux thing. Currently, as I've said before, for us, it's not as useful as we would want it to be, because whatever you do, you're only going to see 4 GB of it. As it stands, I think somebody did build a ROM recently that allowed you to see all 8 GB, but it introduced a whole raft of other things that went wrong at that point, and he pulled it almost immediately. And we mooted, and other people mooted, like bespoke ITX boards for the Compute Module 4 when there was an availability of components and Compute Module 4s. And we did some work on that, and we had a working board, and then we just looked at it, and it made no sense because it was going to cost us that much to do that. It's cheaper to buy the official Raspberry Pi I/O board for 40 quid. We were never going to be able to compete with that. Sticking the SATA board on top, we're still not going to be able to compete with that if we're building our own boards. So we dropped the ITX board idea completely at that point, although I'll come back to that, and went back to the official I/O board with add-ons. It made more sense. Having a load of PCIe slots or whatever didn't make any sense to us, because what would we plug in? We don't have anything that plugs into PCIe slots. As it stands, there seems little point in doing that. And there are adapters and switches available that just plug in anyway. So if we really wanted to go down that path later, it wouldn't be too difficult. So we just dropped back to the standard I/O board. And that gives us the opportunity, should we see Wi-Fi anytime soon, and I think I've been saying that since 2012, should we see Wi-Fi anytime soon, we can just use the standard Wi-Fi that's on the Compute Module 4 anyway. So some recent developments then that we've introduced. The last ROM, which was in May, introduced the option to use big disks. So disks up to 2 terabytes in file core format, and we can supply those, and you can use those. The difficulty we've got at the moment is obviously H-form just goes, well, that looks like a 256 gigabyte disk to me, so I'm going to do it as a 256 gigabyte disk. So we've developed our own formatter to be able to format disks up to 2 terabytes. The issue we've got with that at the minute is it runs in Linux. So we have to format something to file core through Linux to then plug it into a RISCOS computer. Currently, we're doing 1 terabyte discs. If people want those, that seems to make as much sense as anything. Should people want up to 2 terabytes, then we can do that. And it opens up, because we're not restricted to the 4K native sector drives. We can use the 4K native or 512 emulated drives. It opens us up to the non-enterprise drives, which are considerably cheaper than the enterprise drives, which because they're based on enterprise use and they're generally spinning Rust disks, we can just use a standard off-the-shelf 1 terabyte SSD or a 2 terabyte SSD fairly straightforwardly. We've built in CDFS soft TAPI into the ROM now, so you plug in your optical drive, you set CD disks to 1, and there it is. Burning capabilities haven't really been tested. We didn't have any of the drives that Stefan recommends for CD/DVD burn free. It may well work as expected. It may not. I'm guessing at some point we'll get around to testing that in a bit more depth. But when we were talking to people, we don't know how many people use optical drives anymore. USB seems to be a much preferred option, and we definitely don't know how many people burn CDs or DVDs either. There may be some. It's not as common as it used to be. One of the developments in the last ROM was we had big discs working previously, but only on their own. Now we've made it so that big discs can work alongside standard discs. One customer's had a bit of an issue with that, which we can't get to the bottom of because we've tried to replicate that system, and it just seems to work as we expected. So whether it's a dodgy cable or whatever, but we'll get back to that customer about that. But yeah, big discs, and I'll show you on our demo system in a minute that you can have a 1 terabyte drive sat next to a 256 gigabyte drive, and they work perfectly together. In the olden days, pre-March, when we had big discs, you either had big discs or standard discs. You couldn't have a combination of both. We've kind of got past that bit now and made that a bit more straightforward, and apart from that one customer, just works out of the box. You may or may not be aware that hats on the compute module I/O board are what's technically known as a bit of a git. They don't work in the same way that hats would do for us on a Pi 4, because some of the controls for the GPIO stuff are also used on the compute module 4 I/O board to control the display and the camera interfaces. So we've kind of worked out with the help of Rob from LSR what the issue is, and it just means that literally a couple of bits need swapping over when you're building the ROM. It's not quite stable, so it will work sometimes, and then other times it won't. So the only hat that we've really got, I guess, that people use on a regular basis, or most people use on a regular basis, is the Wi-Fi hat, and that's the one that we're trying to get to work reliably. With help from Rob a while back, we kind of got one working sometimes reliably. It's probably not good enough, so we're still working on how we're going to get that to work. I kind of need to get back to Rob from LSR to see how we do that. And we've got some software as well to do over-the-air firmware updates, which we're hoping to roll out imminently. So you won't need to log onto a website to download a new ROM. It will just tell you that there's a new ROM. It will then install any firmware that goes with it. It can even install firmware for things like EDOS, update it, take a backup, save everything you need, tell you to reboot when you're ready, and then when you reboot, all the new firmware and the new ROM will be installed and ready to go. And we've built in some fail safes there to make sure that does work particularly smoothly. The last thing you want is a bricked machine while you get well, you don't need to get a new SD card, it wouldn't be hard work, but we'd rather it worked like completely smoothly. Some future developments we've got lined up is we're looking at something that we're calling HATX, which is a support board for ATX power supplies and PC cases. For the most part, we've got, you can use an ATX power supply to power the board and the drives if you really want to. The on-off switch won't work, so on our boards we repurpose that on-off switch to be a reset switch. The LED for power on will work. What we want though is it to be a straight slot in where everything just works. So you use your on-off switch on your case to turn it on. The lights work as they should. The disc light works as it should. So we're going to work on a HATX board, which is just a plug-in board that allows you to connect all those things, then does everything else that you need it to do in terms of working with a standard off-the-shelf PC case. The I/O board has a real-time clock and fan control built in. You may well know that Chris Hall has done some work on fan control, and mainly because of the same issue that we've got, is the onboard real-time clock and the fan control are on a completely separate bus that RISCOS can't see. So you can put a battery in there and it'll just go, no, can't see anything. It's not that it doesn't recognise the chip, which it won't, but it can't even see the chip in any way, shape or form. It doesn't know that chip is there because it's on a completely separate bus to the one that we can see. So it doesn't work at all. We'll do some work around NVMe support, although we're currently having that dilemma that if file core is the limiting factor, do we put a load of effort into NVMe support for this, only to discover that it don't make anything any faster? It might be a bit of a moot point, but we'll kind of weigh that up, I think, as we're going. As RISCOS Open are improving their support for the eMMC boards, we're obviously going to incorporate that as quickly as it makes sense for us to do that. So currently, we think our next development is going to be for RISCOS 5.30, and we'll build on that solid base, taking it from there and seeing what we need to do. And that should include improved eMMC support as standard. So we will do that. We'll wait for 5.30. 5.30 seems to be taking longer, as far as I can see, than 5.28 did. So we're keeping that under review. It may well be that at some point we opt for what we see as a fairly solid 5.29 and take it from there. It's quite a big job to move the driver for the SATA stuff over to a new build, because we've got to unpick the HAL again to get rid of the USB 3 stuff. Even though that's been improved to some degree, it does kind of expect to see something, I believe. So we'll have to unpick all that, see where we go. So we're kind of hanging off on the next build until we get to 5.30, and that should bring improved eMMC support. eMMC to some degree hampers what we do, because it's easy to be able to just swap out an SD. And as you'll be aware, if you use an eMMC, the SD card is disabled at that point, so then you've got to reprogram the eMMC to get that to work. Chris Hall, again, I know, is running one of his systems from an eMMC, and it will boot from an eMMC, but then you can't see it again. So if you try and look at the files in Loader, it can't see those. You've just kind of got to pretend it's not there. The difficulty with that means you can't easily write back any settings to CMOS. So we did find a program that allowed you to write to CMOS and then read it back at next startup. We've kind of released that to people where we know that they're using eMMCs, but for everybody else, it'll be a case of waiting for 5.30 and doing it from there. One of the other things that we're looking at is looking at porting the technology to other boards. So in a bit, I'll talk about Multiply Fast, where we take a standard board, add that SATA option to that. And similarly, we're looking at a Fast Mini, which is a small footprint fast system, roughly the size in total of a 3.5-inch hard drive, but that includes a fast SATA disk as well, and is a smaller, more compact, pocketable version of the overall fast board. So apart from the mangled bit in the bottom corner there, they're currently the prices that we're looking at. So the core kit, which is a configured SD card and SATA hardware, you need to supply your own compute module, I/O board, and drive, comes in at 99 quid, and that pays for the development of the ROM and the support of that for the lifetime of the system. There's a kit which is the same as the core, but it also includes a 250 gigabyte formatted SSD, an adapter to mount the I/O board in an ITX case, and a shield that you cut to fit your particular system at 149. The Flex, which comes in our oak and acrylic case, so it's the same as kit, but it's all pre-fitted into a case. Comes with a 12-volt power supply, and an additional real-time clock and a heatsink. And then the real systems, you'd still need to provide your own, with the Flex, you'd still need to provide your own I/O board and compute module. The Fire system is our basic system, which is 2 gigabytes of RAM, a 2 gigahertz CPU, 250 gig SSD, a real-time clock, access to all the future updates, and all pre-installed in an ITX case. An aluminium, looks like a Mac Mini style case. As standard, there are options to change the case if you want to do something else. You might want to add an optical drive later, so there'd need to be a bit of a case upgrade. And then our current premium system, which has 4 gigabytes of RAM and a 2 gigahertz CPU, comes with a 1 terabyte file core drive and an optical drive, although that is optional. You can remove that and save yourself a bit of money. Comes with a real-time clock in a premium ITX case, and that's the price for that. Although, depending on how you want it configured, it may go up a little bit or it may come down a little bit. Okay, so that's fast in a whistle-stop tour, really. There's more information on the website for that. There's more information on the rolling presentation in Sala 2, and you can see that applied in real life. When I've finished all this, I'll show you some of that in real life as well, albeit over BNC, so it's slowed down somewhat. So our other future developments, one of the things that we're looking at is a kind of dual disk system just based on a compute module system with just 2 disks, but not necessarily using fast, using an easier option than that. And it's called Chimera because it's basically a chimera, if you know from mythology, as the head of a goat. Goat sometimes standing for greatest of all time, so it runs RISCOS, and the head of a lion, hooks, which means it's secondly equipped with another solid state drive with Raspberry Pi OS on there. I love PowerPoint. I might have mentioned that before. It's got you can have dual or triple SSDs if you really want. You can have an SSD for RISCOS and one for Linux and sharing. And there's an option to run RISCOS from eMMC on that as well. It has gigabit networking built in now, works straight out of the box, plug it in, it kicks up, no need for adapters, no need for waiting for that, it's just there and ready. And it can be repurposed, so you can use it as a Linux and RISCOS dual system, or you can use it as a file server, a disk duplicator, some kind of storage array, network attached storage device, whatever you want. You've got that option of 2 disks running at the same time. You can do whatever you want with them. Our primary purpose, though, will be to do those as 1 disk running RISCOS, 1 disk running Linux, and an app or a switch. We're considering whether we just do a pure hardware switch to switch between and use whatever you want. Once you've got it, do what you want with it. And the next thing that we're talking about, which I will demonstrate a bit later as well, is ECOS. You might know about the EDOS thing that we do, the Easy Dual Operating System. Get that next to the PowerPoint to do its thing. ECOS stands for Easy Concurrent Operating System. So if I'll show you one when we get to the end. So it's Linux in a window in RISCOS, and we've done some work around doing the standard. Here's the entire Linux desktop, and you can do what you want by clicking on the Raspberry Pi button and doing that from there. Or we've managed to get it to work so that you can just say, I just want to see Firefox from Linux in a RISCOS window, and it will just load up Firefox from Linux in a RISCOS window, and you can use it as you would. There's complicated sharing arrangements between the Linux bit and the RISCOS bit, but it's doable. You could even do it if you wanted with any application that's on Linux. So we've tested it with Firefox, with Chrome, which is a bit of a dog slow thing in terms of that. With LibreOffice, so it loads up LibreOffice. You say, I want to do a Word or a Write document or a spreadsheet, pick that one, it appears in the same window, and it is particularly tiny. It's like 2.5 inches by 1 3/4 inches by 1.5 inches. So it's easy to hide. We've got a couple of ways of doing this. One of the ways is we can build it into the FAST system, and it shares the network connection easily. The downside of that is it nobbles ShareFS a bit. We've got to work out how we get past that. Or it can be a standalone thing that just plugs in somewhere invisible. You turn it on, you leave it on, you never look at it again, but you access it through your RISCOS system whenever you want, in whichever format you want, either the app itself or the entire computer. It has dedicated hardware, so our options are likely to be 2 GB or 4 GB of direct RAM, 2 GHz CPU, and rapid SSD for the Raspberry Pi OS to use to make everything smoother. We could do it with a hard drive, a dedicated hard drive if we really needed to, but it just seemed a bit silly. And as I said, you can either have it fitted into your fast machine, or you can have it external with all that stuff that goes on there. And it is a really low power device that has its advantages. When we were testing it, we connected it up to our router and plugged it in, powered it from the USB socket on the back of the router. So its draw is particularly low in terms of that. The next one which we're looking at is MultiPi Fast, which is a multi-headed machine, so it can run different OSs at the same time in one system, and we're trying to work out how we can port fast to that. We've got it working basically, but it's not the smoothest that we would want it to be. So it gives us RISCOS, and it gives us those exceptional data speeds that we know of. It's all encased in a standard mini ITX case with full power control and working LEDs, and each head can have up to 8 GB of RAM, dedicated storage, eMMC, whatever you want it to be. It's a complicated beast, but it gives us that option to use our standard RISCOS stuff, but also to incorporate other boards such as a Banana Pi or a ROC 64, or I did notice that Orange Pi were doing something this week that would be compatible with that as well, which gives you access to multiple versions of different Linuxes, some better than others, I would say. having tried to install Linux on some of those, I haven't got the time or the will to do that. But it's such a palaver for the difference that you get. And then into the beyond, what we're going to do further future, we're going to look at making all of our Pi 4 systems, if we can, use eMMC as standard. We've dabbled with EM, and it seems to be really useful. So things like the Fortress and the Pi Hard, we're going to try and work out whether we can chisel eMMC into there. We're going to try and make as many of our systems through that eMMC and using the compute module 4s wherever we can as user upgradable as possible. And from the stuff that we did on the Chimera, we're going to look at whether we can access integrated Linux apps within RISCOS as a bit of an easy option. So it is just a case of, I only want Firefox, I'm just going to run Firefox in a window and use that there. Do some work around using those alternative platforms like Banana Pi, Orange Pi, and things like that. And we're going to kind of look at some of the alternative OSs that are around that we can make better use of. I think where we currently don't, where we currently focus largely on RISC-OS, obviously, and then Raspberry Pi OS, because that one seems easiest. There are some others like Twister OS, which has been particularly successful, but then some others, including Windows, really. So if you want more details on any of that stuff, there's a few websites you can go and look at there. And we do offer on a lot of our stuff a click and buy. You can just click on the PayPal thing. It will do all the necessary workings out. It will even give you an option on some of those systems to pay in 3 installments. We get the money straight away, you get the product straight away, and then you can stagger your payments through PayPal. And I don't think there's any interest on that. I think it just comes out as divided by 3-ish. You pay 1 installment today, 1 in a month, and 1 in a month after that. That's pretty much. I told you I'd never get to an hour, but I did much better than I thought. Has anybody got any questions at this stage?
I've just questioned about the Linux and a window inside RISCOS. How much communication is there between the windows? I mean, can you drag and drop out of it, or?
That'd be lovely, but no. I'm going for no.
So clipboard presumably will work.
Clipboard works of a fashion. It'll kind of do text and chunks of text. When you get to trying to move a file, it kind of falls over. It doesn't even really attempt it, to be honest. It just goes, no, I'm not doing that. I guess the easy thing to do is use the shared drive or some sort of shared drive that moves things between each different thing.
Okay. So
that would be like we do with eDOS. There's just a FAT32 partition on the drive. You drop things in there. When you look in the other system, it's available already. So I guess that would be where we'd be going.
Okay, I just hope a miracle occurred there.
No, we're
not. Okay, thanks.
Anybody else have any questions at this point, or
something in the chat? I don't know what it is. But...
the lack of noise, as Mark says, is there's no fan involving our fast systems. We don't particularly need one. We throw in a fairly chunky heatsink, and it keeps it really low. So we didn't bother to go as far as a fan. We know some people like fans though and want to keep it much cooler than a heatsink will do. So we are looking at that, but it's that separate bus issue. What OSs have you tried with ECOS? Well, we've tried standard Raspberry Pi OS. That one seems fairly straightforward and just works. We've tried Twister OS, which is it's a bit like Raspberry Pi OS with bells and whistles added on. and it gives you that option to use Wine and something that they call Box86, which combines to give you access to some basic Windows programs through there. But we've also tried Windows as well, and that seems to work reasonably well. Not entirely comfortable with that yet, but it seems to work reasonably well with Windows on that as well. Okay, so I'll if nobody's got any other questions.
You said, Andy, you said that getting eMMC to work basically meant you had to completely reintegrate the SATA driver, which seems a great shame. I know the problem with the USB 3 hanging on startup has been solved because they found what that was. But does that actually make it any easier?
It does a bit. The issue we're still going to have to some degree is that unpicking some of those bits, so it's looking for a SATA board instead. So it's kind of what we did before. We'll kind of have to do again, and that was the bulk of the work, which is why we've kind of said if 5.30 comes along in inverted commas soon, we'll do it on 5.30. If 5.30 looks like it's dragging its feet, it's just like a lump of work that we don't want to have to repeat again, because I guess our feeling is we'll do 5.29 if we need to, and then 5.30 will appear a week later and we'll have to do it all again. And it's such a bulk of work to get that to work at that stage. I don't think we'd want to do it twice in rapid succession. The traffic light system on the rule website doesn't help. It's not really, there is no, I don't know, ETA for it, which doesn't help, so we can't see what we're aiming for. And I guess from their perspective, it's impossible for them to produce an ETA for that. It seems to be going on a bit longer than 5.28 did, but for us, we're trying to avoid doing the work and then a week later doing the work again, because we've gone 5.3 as a stable base.
Yeah, I think unfortunately one item got added to it. They found latest versions of the Pi 400 had a new PHY chip, whatever that is. But I think they've almost cracked that one now. Wasn't being initialized properly, but it, as you say, it seems to be taking a hell of a long time. They haven't even got a candidate up for the Raspberry Pi yet.
Yeah. I mean, and I do think some of the stuff that they're doing, sort of not in the ROM, the software stuff, is quite useful, and that's why I think for us we're trying to avoid doing it twice, really, because it will feel like we're doing it now for 5.29 just to get eMMC working, and then doing it again in a few weeks to get everything on that stable base with a different software structure as well. So we're kind of holding off. But at some point, we'll have to bite a bullet and go, let's do it now. And then it'll be like when you're waiting for your food in a pub, and as soon as you go to the toilet, they bring you dinner. It'll be that. We'll do the MMC stuff on 5.29, and a week later, 5.3 will come out, and we'll have to do it again.
Yes, understood. Thanks.
So now, bear in mind, this is running over VNC, so there's a bit of it hampers it somewhat when I'm doing it, but I'm going to try and show you what fast is capable of. So the first thing that as I said, Matthew Phillips, who develops RISCOSM, was impressed enough to just buy one. So I guess I ought to show you what. Yeah, okay, whatever. How that works out for that. So if I do a search for a random place, clown, it's appropriate. My first job, bizarrely, was in clown college, which was people just assumed I learned to juggle and wear big flat shoes. So that's clown really quickly. If I zoom in, it does it at a fairly rapid rate of knots. If I zoom out again, if you try that on a Pi 4, it's going to take you a while.
If you try it on an ARM-X6, you can go and make a cup of tea.
Well, yeah, but it does work particularly quickly in terms of how fast it can get the data from the disk and process it, which means that things like that just work. It's almost like having Google Maps, but not.
Yeah, I had to access a map like that on my fast this morning. Loads in under 1 second, and the map appears, well, just like clicking your fingers. Brilliant.
It is really, really quick. And I was impressed doing that, thinking, blimey, that's better than I expected. Even if you zoom out a long way, it will take a while. And a lot of it is because it's got a load of vector stuff to try and process and fit into the right place. But I think you might be able to go away and cook your tea if you were trying this on a slower system.
Go to Ceylon and find the leaves.
Takes about half an hour on an ARM-X6 at 1,000,000.
Well, there you go then. I don't know what that were, but it went half an hour, and it's
under a minute.
Yeah. So that's like a bit of a clue as to how fast that, no pun intended, how fast that's going. One of the other things I suppose is I ought to show you is the 1 terabyte drive there. Well, 1 terabyte as according to the disk manufacturer. So 932 gigabytes standard ADF. Well, our ADFS for now, although we are likely to release that as to rule for them to choose whether they want to use it or not. And I've got a file here which is 339 meg or thereabouts. I'll copy that to that disk, and you'll see how fast disk copying is. So I could copy it to RAM, but I probably haven't made it big enough, and then copy it back from there to there. So that's moving between 2 separate disks. Again, other computers, that's going to be like considerably slower than you perhaps want it to be, for a drive and for file that size. I guess, I mean, that's pretty much, let me see. I can try and show you ECOS, which we're currently running over VNC. But the way we did it, where we were getting single applications to come up, we weren't using VNC. And it was quite useful, but that machine isn't plugged in at the minute. I missed that. The VNC at my end means that I think that's so. There's just Raspberry Pi OS in a window, and doing the external version, you can plug that in straight into the back of your router, not worry about it again. And any computer that you've got, if you wanted to access LibreOffice or whatever, it would just be there. It kind of, to some degree, takes us into the realms of producing, I guess, Linux computers. But the advantages for RISCOS with things that don't work for us natively is quite useful in that respect. I'd reduce the size of my RISCOS desktop to get it onto my screen, but the ECOS thing was reduced in comparison. So that comes just pre-set up at that. It has its own RAM, its own CPU, its own storage, with links across, which aren't set up on this, which are fairly straightforward. That said, we have had it running Windows as well. So if you're not familiar or don't really want to dabble with Linux, then Windows is an option on there as well. And even using Twister OS, to some degree, you get the best of both worlds, in as much as you can use Linux and run occasional Windows programs as well. I just noticed the time. I've got 3 minutes left. I was going to show you the ECOS system, but it's in the other room. And by the time I get there and get back, my 3 minutes will be up. And we'll kind of done that. Has anybody got any other questions?
Just to say, Andrew had that thing for loading Iris via a RAM disk, but I found fast was so fast I didn't need that. Iris opens in the blink of an eye now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's where we got to. It seems a bit of a moot point having Iris RAM because the disk is almost as fast as the RAM. And you're right, Doug. It would be good to get an updated RDP client. I did have a chat with the author and said he was gonna. I'm going to use that, Vince, unfortunately. Who did say he was going to update the RDP client to a newer version of XRDP or whatever version he was using, but that was a couple of years ago, so I'm guessing that isn't likely to come off at this point. Okay, and on that cheery note then, I shall end my hour. I've been filled it much more successfully than I thought I was going to.
Thanks very much, Andy. Again, fascinating, and if I got a bit more room on my desk, I'd dash out and get one.